and sort of confirming your view of that yield curve inversion. Right now, when we talk about yields, we talk about inversion, we talk about the tea leaves to watch. There's no one who I'd rather speak to than Jim Bianco, founder and president of Bianco Research. Jim, do you buy that we can see more with this bear market rally, or is it basically on its last legs?
No, the rally could continue. I do think it is a bear market rally. I mean, it could go to the end of the year. But I don't think necessarily that October 10th was the low. And part of the reason is what has been the hope of every rally we've had this year. The Fed's going to pause. They're going to pivot. They're going to step down. We've got peak inflation. It's all the same thing. And Chairman Powell's been fairly consistent. Every time the market gets itself excited, he comes out and he gives an 8-minute speech and he says, no, I'm not. And then that ends the rally. And I fear that that is eventually going to come with this one, too.
And that's the reason why people have been so focused on the yield curve, because that's telling that story, that the Fed is going to keep going even as people's belief in longer term growth keeps contraction, keeps coming down. So at what point do you see the signal from perhaps some signs of a softening in CPI that perhaps the Fed has been fully priced in to a market that's not so bad?
Well, I don't think we've got the signal yet. You're right about the yield curve. It is the 10-year, 3-month curve is the one that all economists look at. The 10-year, 2-year curve is what the market looks at. But that economist curve only inverted in the last week or so. And it's saying to us that only in the last week or so is the Fed beginning to get too tight. Everything they've done up till now has not been. And that doesn't mean the Fed has to immediately pause. The market could stay this way for several months before it turns around. The question becomes about inflation. I still think the question about is inflation peaked misplaced? Yeah, it probably has. The better question is it going to 2% or is it going to stop at 4%? Right. Because if it stops at 4%, then the Fed has not been too aggressive. It's going to go to 2%. It has been. And I'm in the camp it's going to stop somewhere around 4 or 3.5%. And that's the real problem. Not that we've peaked, but that we're not on our way back to 2%.
Well, and Jim, that's where I mentioned this in the last hour or the hour before. But the bottom line, Jim Bianco, is all of a sudden the jobs report of December, first week of December, December 2, all of a sudden becomes a lot more important than it was a week ago. Are we going to see a jump in unemployment rate in December, or do we got to wait for the first week of January?
Well, so far this year, the story has always been there's going to be a jump in the unemployment rate. And yet we never get it. We produced 260,000 jobs last month. We produced 4 million jobs this year. And initial claims are still in the low 200,000s. So for everybody that wants to see, and I mean wants because they want to rally, they want to see softening in the labor market so that the Fed would pivot or pause. They haven't gotten it yet. And whether or not we're going to see that in the first week of December remains to be seen. But so far this year, it is constant. The employment report has constantly been stronger than everybody expects.
But do you think that's going to break? I mean, our listeners, our viewers are seeing the daily gloom of 10,000 here, freezes here, whatever, on and on and on. Is there a shift now, Jim, to where finally employment matters?
Well, employment does matter. And whether or not we're going to see that shift, you're right. Everybody focuses on layoffs and people losing their job. But what doesn't make the press is people getting jobs. And like I said, we've produced 4 million more jobs this year already. And that is going to be a prerequisite, I think, a weakening labor market to begin the discussion about whether or not the Fed is going to pause. And so far, that has not happened. And I don't think it's going to happen in 2 weeks when we get the next payroll report.
Jim, I want to finish where we began. You originally said you don't necessarily see us getting back down to 2% in terms of inflation, and that rates are not necessarily going to come back down to where they have been, even a 2% kind of level. So where do you see us leveling out? I mean, how persistent is this concern, especially as you have the likes of Jim Bullard putting 7% rates as a potential possibility out there?
I think that the inflation level can be very persistent because I've been one that has argued we're in a post-pandemic economy. That's not like the pre-pandemic economy, and that things have changed, especially in the labor market, in globalization, and in energy. It's going to keep inflation high for several years. And that means we're in a new regime with interest rates. That where we are right now, with 4% interest rates, might only be neutral. And maybe Jim Bullard is right, and that's what we have to start thinking about, that restrictive, sufficiently restrictive, to use his phrase, might be closer to 5 or 6 or 7%, as opposed to thinking that rates are too high right now.
Jim Bianco, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated this morning here on Fed Dynamics and the mystery going forward. We got